Good morning. We are delighted to be here today. This is the Power Panel, and we are so excited to have you here. I'm Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook, also known as Ambassador Sujay, and I was the third U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom in the Obama administration. And it was important that I share that because being the first African American, first female, first faith leader, I brought those three perspectives to the religious freedom table, which hadn't been there. The position started in 1998 under the International Religious Freedom Act, which in October celebrated our 25th anniversary, and all six of us who served in that role or are serving in that role are still alive, and so it was wonderful to be together. But what it meant was when the national security and the foreign policy and the religious freedom discussions had been discussed, those perspectives weren't at the table. And so we were able to create what's now still in existence, the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, Female Faces on Faith, and the Religious and Foreign Policy Working Group. And those are still active at the State Department. As I went across the seas we had 199 countries in our portfolio, and as I went across the seas representing the United States, as I sat at the diplomatic table, I was always the only woman. But many countries, there was a circle of chairs around the table on the outside, on the periphery, and there were many women sitting at those tables who were Native women who had civil society, women who were advocates pushing for religious freedom. And they would pass me their card, and many of us became friends and advocates together collectively. And some of those women I've worked with previously, and some are on this panel today. So we wanted to introduce to you a dynamic group of women. Rachel Miner in her last comment said, can you listen to the mothers? And can you learn from the mothers? And today I'm going to ask that you learn and listen from the women leaders who are advocates for religious freedom. It is my delight to be with you and to be the moderator of this panel. This is going to be conversational, and we hope that there'll be some opportunities for you to learn some unique, wonderful things that are happening. There are some who pray today, thank God I'm not a woman. That is not our prayer. We are reversing that and flipping the script, and we are very excited to be women leaders on this panel. So let me introduce to some and present to others from my left to your right, Katrina Lantos Swett, who's the president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. Next to her is Hurunnessa Fariad, who's the director of outreach for the Multi-Faith, and Sabrina Dent, who's the director of the BJC Center. Next to her is Tschika McBean, Esquire, Human Rights Officer in the Office of Public Affairs for the Bahá'í of U.S., and then Wei New, our newest mommy, 3-month-old with her, Executive Director of the Women's Peace Network. And so I'm going to just ask each of you to introduce yourselves and let us know why you think it's important for women's views to be in the religious freedom discussion. I'll start with you, Katrina, and we'll go from my left to the right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sujay. And I just want to say that Sujay, as still the only woman to serve in that distinguished role on behalf of the U.S. government, did a phenomenal job and continues to do a phenomenal job. And I think the difference is, that you brought the spirit with you, Sujay, Ambassador Sujay. Every time, everywhere you went, people not only heard those formal representations and those formal presentations, but they felt your heart, they felt your spirit. And so the impact of your service continues to this day. I also want to pay tribute to Notre Dame, to Dean Cole, to Stephanie Barkley. What a phenomenal event this is, and how exciting it is to see one of the great universities of the United States taking a lead in what to me is the central human rights battle of our day. And it is really a fight, not for the soul of our nation, but for the soul of our world, this fight to defend that foundational freedom of religion, conscience, and belief. A human right so foundational that I often say, and I believe with every fiber of my being, that it is the wellspring right from which that whole panoply of other rights that we cherish, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of expression, democratic processes spring. It goes back to that fundamental conscience rights that we honor and celebrate here today. So I came to this work of defending freedom of religion, conscience, and belief, I suppose you could say very honestly. I am the daughter of two Holocaust survivors. And so within my own family's history, we knew and experienced what it meant when people became targeted, persecuted, and ultimately massacred simply by virtue of what it is they believed or the community of faith that they belonged to. And so, really, from a very, very young age, it was something that I was deeply aware of as foundational to building societies of decency and safety for all people. But there was another element in my family story that also sort of imbued in me from a very young age an awareness that, as important as kind of defending one's own rights and protecting one's own tribe, as it were, from the dangers that were out there in the world, was also equally important, this sense of our shared brotherhood and sisterhood. And that other dimension to my family story was that both of my parents' lives were saved because someone who had nothing in common with them, they were Hungarian, they were Jewish, they were part of a persecuted and hunted community. But a great hero by the name of Raoul Wallenberg, he was Swedish, he was Christian, and he came from one of the most privileged and powerful families in all of Sweden, a neutral country during the Second World War. But he left the security and the safety and the protection of neutral Sweden to come to Hungary at the height of the Holocaust for the Hungarian Jews with one mission and one mission only, and that was to try and save as many innocent lives as possible. And he saved a boy, and he saved a girl, and they became my parents. And in one of those remarkable ways in which history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, I think that's a quote attributable to Mark Twain. My very first granddaughter, a very powerful female who one day I think will be on a panel with you, Ambassador Suzan, was born on what would have been Raoul Wallenberg's 90th birthday. And so, so that's kind of the inspiration behind my engagement in this world.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll be hearing more from Katrina and others, but that's a powerful story. And we're so glad you're here and glad that there's a generation who's following you
Oh, yes.
in your footsteps. We want to hear from Hurunnessa Fariad as well. Please introduce yourself.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. My name is Hurunnessa Fariad, and I serve as Director of Outreach at Multi Faith Neighbors Network, where we bring evangelical Christian pastors, Jewish rabbis, and Muslim imams to the table in their respected cities here in the U.S., and we do religious freedom works overseas as well. My two main projects right now are making sure that women are part of our conversations, because whenever you say clergy, it leaves most of the women out. And we have other projects that we're working together to infiltrate programmings within specific cities, and we'll talk more about that later. I am a former child refugee who came to the United States as part of the first wave of Afghans who came to the US after the Soviet invasion in the early 80s. And growing up in Queens, New York City, I was exposed to people from all different backgrounds. Majority of my teachers were Jewish and understood the plight of us as minorities in this country and what that meant and where we're supposed to be and where we're supposed to go. So I did have a really great upbringing in terms of being exposed to people of different faith backgrounds and having that as a background in the work that I do right now. And you know, the question is women and religious liberty and what that looks like. And I can't go on with that question without thanking Notre Dame for even having this panel, because a lot of times we are overlooked as women in religious freedom work. And I'm not sure if it's conscious or subconscious, but it does happen. And so I'm so grateful to Dean Cole for having us and Ambassador Suzan for moderating the session and everybody on the advisory board. For me, it's pretty simple. We're more than half the population, right? We're what, 52% of the human race. I mean, if we're not at the table, there's something wrong. Women are transformational. We are multi-talented. We can multitask. we're emotionally connected to people around us. And all of these things, like Rachel said in the last panel, gives us a lot to bring to the table. And it would be a detriment to organizations to leave women out. When you have women in leadership positions in organizations, you will see that that organization is going above and beyond a lot of the other organizations that might be on the same platform. So bringing women in religious liberty work brings a component that brings the next generation of people in line with what that actually looks like and what it should look like within our communities. We're teachers, we can teach our children about what that means. We build relationships, and we're very good at keeping those relationships, and we can talk more about that when we move on to the conversation.
Thank you, Hurunnessa. And Hurunnessa has lots of stories, as all of us, in terms of the work we're doing. So thank you for being on the panel today and accepting our invitation. Sabrina Dent.
Good morning. As Ambassador Sujay stated, I'm Dr. Sabrina Dent, and I serve in the daytime as the BJC Director for the Center for Faith, Justice, and Reconciliation. We look at religious freedom through a broader justice lens. And so I come into this work remembering, and I have to name them, that I'm the daughter of Larry and Thurdell Dent, that my father was a Pentecostal preacher but grew up Baptist, that my great-grandfather founded a church in Reduco, North Carolina, because he did not have the privilege of worshiping the way in which he chose to worship. Also remember that I come from a lineage of AME preachers as well. And so my family history is much more diverse and much more complex than just simply being a Black Christian. I myself was once married to a Catholic, and I studied Scientology as well as did Buddhist meditation. And I simply right now identify as Sabrina, who is spiritual. That is important to me and part of my identities and how I enter into this space. Religious freedom became a part of my life when I had the opportunity to be introduced to the BJC in 2015. And it came on the heels, I was a BJC fellow, and it came on the heels of the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, at Mother Emanuel AME Church. And a lot of people like to look at that issue as just a racial issue, and I'm like, no. That was a racial and religious freedom violation because those people were in their place of worship when that happened. And so when I think about religious freedom in this country, I think about this, that depolarizing religious freedom in this country requires that we really take a critical look and understanding of history in this country. That the question for me about religious freedom really is a matter of looking at it as a justice issue. That means it unearths questions about who has power, who has agency, and who has the right to be human. And if we really have honest conversations about that, and we have conversations about the experiences of the founding framers in this country and who sat around the table, who had the opportunity to speak and who had the opportunity to be considered, we know that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color were left out of that, but also women. But we're here. And we're doing work, and we have moved civilizations for a very long time. And in this space, for me, it is important that I raise the concerns and the experiences of women because we are too often impacted by the policies that happened and impact our lives and our families. And so I'll share more about what I'm passionate about in the work that I do that centers around the experiences, especially of African American women in this work. And I look forward to sharing more with you when that time comes.
Thank you, Dr. Dent. And what does BJC stand for?
The Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty.
Thank you so much. And next to her is Esquire Tschika McBean.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on this. Sorry. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. My name is Tschika McBean Okosi. I'm the Human Rights Officer at the U.S. Bahá'í Office of Public Affairs. And my role entails working to advocate for religious freedom for persecuted Bahá'í communities around the world, especially in Iran and Yemen. I'm also an attorney in Washington, D.C., New York, and Guyana, and also international law professional. And so what drew me to this space after, I guess, prior to this, I was prosecuting child abuse cases for New York City, and I was called to take on this role as a human rights officer. And one thing that drew me to this space is knowing that there are many victims of religious persecution, and for women, they face a dual persecution, one because of their gender and one because of their faith. And throughout my life, growing up as well as a personal connection to this, I saw a lot of women in my family, because in the Baha'i community, there's no pastors. There's just a community of people who, perform the pastoral duties of a community. And a lot of them were women, right? And that was not something I saw, in various religious groups. And so one thing about the Baha'i faith is that the principles advocate strongly for gender equality. And there are specific passages that speaks to if women are not in spaces, that space would not advance to the highest level. And so one of my goals is to ensure that women are included in conversations, that when we enter spaces and we engage in these spaces, any space, the space just elevates at a different level, right? And that's not something of being biased, that's just fact in the way in which we approach conversations and relationships and stuff like that. And so, that's one of the reasons that I'm in this space, to advocate for gender equality, ensure that women's voices are being heard, and to ensure that the victims that most of the time remain nameless, their stories are brought to the fore, and you guys get to hear about what they contribute to this space, and I guess what we lose in terms of if they continue to be persecuted. Thank you.
Thank you, Tschika. And Wei new, new mommy. New.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, it's been a very, very exciting and I must say a kind of spiritual moment to become a new mother. So I'm very, very emotional at this point. So I'll try to do my best in this panel. I ran back without your permission. I ran back to the hotel to feed my baby, and then I came back within 20 minutes. So I apologize.
Welcome to the world of moms. Yes.
So my name is Wei Nu. I am the founder and executive director of Women's Peace Network in Myanmar. And I am a former political prisoner. I would say a teenage political prisoner. I was 17 years old when I was arrested with my father, my mom, my brother, my sister, 5 of us, because of my father's political leaderships in Burma democracy movement, and as well as because of my identity as a Rohingya ethnic and religious minority in Burma. We were targeted and arrested, sentenced for long-term imprisonment. And after my release, the violence against the Rohingya broke out in Burma, and I have realized that women are used as a trigger for these violence attacks or so-called communal violence. And women are impacted in many ways, online and offline. So we thought that it's important to bring a human voice and women's voice to mitigate some of the negative narrative that put around over the women bodies and women in themselves, and tackle some of the hate speech. So I founded Women's Peace Network, and since then we've been working on the promotions of human rights and religious liberty work. By doing so, we noticed that it is the challenges that we face when religious freedoms are violated, it's unique. And often it's not discussed when we address the religious violations or the conflicts and violence attack. Sometimes it can be crimes against humanity or even genocide in the case of Rohingya. We have undermined or overlook some of the issues and situations that women uniquely face. When women have a voice in the table, and I think it is incredibly powerful to avoid undermining of the understanding of religious freedom work itself and how to address it. And I think for our experience, this is one of the most important contribution to the cause that we're working on, and I definitely think that's why it is one of the very reasons beyond many my fellow incredible panelists has discussed is this, and that's why I'm super grateful for the Ambassador Sujay for created this panel and Notre Dame team to have this panel and invited me to be this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you just join me in welcoming this dynamic panel? So we know who you are and some of the triggers why you do what you do, but you're doing so many exciting things on the ground. Katrina, one of the things you're most excited about is a course you're teaching at Tufts. Can you tell us about it and why you're excited about it?
Absolutely. So I wear a few hats. I am president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. I got to work with Ambassador Suzan when I was chair and vice chair at USERF, and I'm also involved with the annual IRF Summit with Ambassador Sam Brownback. But another thing I do is I'm an adjunct professor at Tufts University. And a few years ago, I created a course on international religious freedom. Sort of the subtitle is Defending America's First Freedom Abroad. And I was very curious to see sort of what the reaction would be in terms of would students be interested, would they sign up, how would the course go? Because generally speaking, the university is not necessarily an environment that is welcoming to topics around anything that has the word religion or religious in it. In fact, I think for most young people, the phrase religious freedom or religious liberty is usually accompanied by what I like to call scare quotes. You know, they don't necessarily even want to engage with the subject on its own terms. And what I found over the years is teaching this course that usually my students come in a couple of different categories. There are the somewhat hostile to skeptical students. There's usually one or two that are themselves people of pretty profound faith who feel a little alone and isolated on campus. And so they're sort of coming hoping to find a bit of an oasis. But the widespread thing that I discover is real religious freedom illiteracy. They do not know what we're talking about. They don't understand the issue. They don't understand, for example, that Article 18 of the Universal Declaration is a profound and really robust sort of definition and engagement and defense of freedom of religion and conscience and belief. They don't understand that the fight for FORB, and I know this audience knows what I mean when I use the acronym, exerts itself as aggressively and as passionately on behalf of persecuted Christians or persecuted Muslims, but also on behalf of persecuted atheists or agnostics in theocratic societies where they are under enormous threat. So it's really fun and exciting and sometimes a little nerve-wracking to sort of walk that journey with them. But I find, Ambassador, that by the end of the course, many of my students who I would have put in that skeptical to hostile basket, they were not coming in terribly friendly towards the topic. And I think they were kind of coming in loaded for bear. They were gunning for a fight. They have themselves become very passionate defenders of this right. And actually, one final fun little sort of end to the story. On Monday, I was in New York for meetings at a pretty prominent human rights organization. And I was being given a quick tour of the office, and suddenly over my shoulder, I heard someone say, Professor Swett, is that you? And I turned around, and it was one of my students from the course I taught at Tufts. The very first year I taught the religious freedom course. And it was every professor's dream, because she said, oh, you're the one who inspired me to go into this field, and that course changed my life. And obviously, you know, that's what you live for if you are ever in a classroom. But it just felt so good, and it was wonderful to see a young woman, a bright young woman, now recruited to become, more broadly speaking, part of the human rights movement, but with a real understanding of women and religious freedom and how important they are to each other.
Wow, thank you for your inspiration. And just for those who may not know what FORB means, it is FORB.
Oh, I'm sorry, freedom of religion or belief. And you know, we tend to speak about IRF in the US context, international religious freedom, but in the European context, they're much more comfortable with the FORB framing, and I'm more comfortable with it too, and I like to throw in conscience, because I think that's the most robust and capacious and inclusive way to think about these rights that we're defending, that we are defending freedom of religion, yes, freedom of belief, yes, but also freedom of conscience, which is deeper and in some ways even more inclusive.
Thank you so much. Now, if I made a list of everything that these women do, it would go on till tomorrow. We'd have to have 2 conferences. But our next speaker, Hurunnessa Fariad, has many projects she's excited about. But I'm going to ask you to talk about the Menstrual Cup Project.
Sure. So I'm passionate in building programs under the religious freedom, liberty umbrella. I like to see things measured and see things impacting the community on the ground. So at Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, I came up with a crazy idea of doing a women's health called Accessibility and Dignity for Women. And I pitched it to Pastor Bob Roberts, Imam Majid, and Rabbi Saperstein. And it's something different, something new, but they went along with it, and I built a concept note around it. And my first funder was actually the Adams Center, which is the second largest masjid in the whole United States, where Imam Majid is the executive imam and where I go to. And so we got funding for the distribution of about 400 menstrual cups to marginalized women in Loudoun County. And the reason why this is just not only impacting the women on the ground, but I got evangelical Christian pastors to come and get in front of a camera and talk about something that normally clergy are very shy to talk about, like women's health when it's connected to menstrual and period poverty and what that actually looks like. And all of them will tell me that they've learned so much. Imam Majid was there. There's a whole video out on why this is such an important project for us all to be taking into consideration, because women all across the world lose about or miss 3 to 5 days of work or school every month because they cannot afford to get menstrual products, whether it's pads or tampons or whatever. The menstrual cup is $10. It lasts 10 years, and it's reusable and has a very low impact on the environment. And then I pitched it to my friend, Rabbi Sue Shankman, and I said, hey, listen, Sue, you need to help me with this. So will your congregation be willing to fund this project? And she pushed it through, and they're the second one to pull out this project in September. So we're going to have her team, the evangelical Christian pastor in DC, who are all part of our cohorts at Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, but also the women that we bring in through my Inspire program. Because remember, I told you that women are also part of the work that we do. So we're intentional about having those women come at these events. And I'm doing also one in Atlanta where our women's Inspire group is leading this to take menstrual cups to women who are in detention centers in Atlanta who cannot even afford menstrual products in jail. So there are about 200 that are going to get that, and then they're going to do fundraising to get more of these cups to women who are incarcerated. So all of this is tied into religious liberty and freedom, because if we're not working together to ameliorate situations on the ground, then we're just talking. We need to bring programs in that are actually changing the lives of people on the ground. We can't just keep talking about it. Programs that you can measure, programs that you can see the benefit, programs that people have the money to fund. And when we're funding things, we need to make sure we're funneling through these types of programs that are changing the lives of the people that we talk about, regardless of where they're from, what religion they practice, or whether they believe in God or not. It is their right, and it is our responsibility to make sure we're giving that to them.
Thank you. That's powerful. I wish I had known you a few years ago, but we know you now. So we're going to also try to find people to help fund this. It's wonderful. Dr. Sabrina Dent, again, the list is enormous and tremendous, but I was very interested in the BJC Fellows and the Religious Freedom Mobile Institute. Yes. Tell us about that and what things you're doing to help reimagine the Black church.
Right. So the BJC Fellows program is an opportunity for young and emerging professionals between the ages of 25 to 45 years old to learn more about religious freedom through the lens and experiences of Baptist dissenters, looking at it from a historical perspective as well as theological perspective, and to really develop skills around civic education and to take action. That's the other part of it, is to take action in the community, because it's not enough for it to be theoretical. That program is something that we offer where people have the opportunity to come to Williamsburg for about 4 to 5 days and really learn and engage with other leaders in the community. It's a number of 10 people that are accepted into this program, and it's actually where I got my start in and doing religious freedom work. But from that, there are many opportunities to do work in community. However, that individual wants to show up for their context and how religious freedom might have impact in their community. But the Religious Freedom Mobile Institute was something that I actually had the opportunity to start about 3 years ago, and was supported by Vanderbilt Divinity School through their Racial Justice Collaborative. And it was an opportunity to really look at the complex politics around race and religious freedom in this country in a more comprehensive way, to say where is there greater impact in communities of color on this topic. From there, we had the opportunity this past year to partner with Dr. Anthony Penn, who is with the Center for Engaged Research and Collaborative Learning at Rice University. Because the concern for us was to look at a conversation, or to host a conversation, where Black church leaders and Black non-theists could come together to really reimagine it and what it means to think about religious freedom for Black America. A lot of people make the assumption that most Black people are, and the majority are, Christian, but not everyone is Christian. And so we come into these conversations differently. But the reality of it is, within the Black community and other communities of color, we still have issues that impact us in detrimental ways that need to be talked about. And so how do we find common language and a common sense of understanding to get to a place so we can address those issues and not be hung up on religion that sometimes can divide us? So it's been a very powerful project that we did last year. We had 12 scholars to engage in that work. And it has led to a book project that will come out, because these conversations need to happen within our community. It was what I call a very public family conversation. People had the opportunity to listen and hear, but these are some things that might not come up in other spaces that we have to really address. And it has great impact because of also the experiences of Black women in this country.
I love it. Thank you so much. And when can we expect the book?
The book will be out in 2026.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dent. Remember that name, Sabrina. Okay, Tschika, please tell us some things. Let me get it. Our Story is One project. It's very exciting. Can you tell us about that and why it's so important?
Yes, so as Professor Swett just outlined, freedom of religion of belief is a foundational human right. To me, it's as real and impactful and important as all the rights that we are familiar with. Freedom from the free speech, for example, right to privacy, freedom from slavery. It's way the same, it's as important. And when this right is denied, we see countless of victims, right, that are being persecuted. And women who are persecuted based on FORB, they tend to suffer two sets of persecution, one because of their gender, one because of their faith. But their response to persecution is something that I find that's very fascinating. Women are, beat down and experience so much persecution, but their response to it is very unique. You see levels of genius, and one of the response to persecution that I found really exciting, I want to talk about, is the Our Story is One campaign. That campaign was started by the Bahá'í international community last year, which honors the life of 10 Baha'i women who were executed by the Iranian government on June 18, 1983. At the time when the execution occurred, it made news, but the history behind those women's lives and the impact of their death created such a response at that time, but the entire last year, the response of the world learning about these women, their lives, how they stood resolutely when they were faced with the choice to either recant their faith or face execution. It inspired so many people. And it also connects the generalized suffering of all Iranian women. There's a fight right now to uphold gender equality. And the message of the Story of One campaign says that regardless of faith, regardless of background, women across the board suffers in unique ways but similar ways. The Our Story is One campaign, I'll just give you a brief background of the 10 women. In 1983, they were all hung one after the other at dawn in an attempt for them to see each other's death to kind of force them to recant their faith. And they all saw that, but they still, at the moment, did not recant their faith. And to me, that shows so much strength. And there were nurses. The youngest one was 17 years old, and she had 1 year to complete her high school education. There were nurses. There were veterinary students. One of the women, her husband was executed 2 days ago, 2 days prior to her execution, and her son also was executed as well. And they knew that information. They endured months of horrendous persecution of various formats. They were stuck in isolation for months, and they were all being forced to recant your faith. Recant your faith, and all this will stop. And for months, they stood resolutely, and they said, no. We hold human rights, freedom of religion be so fundamental that regardless of what we suffer to uphold this right, we're going to endure it. And they all, one after the other, saw each other being hung, and they just stood resolutely. And so the Our Story is One campaign, honoring this strength, honoring the strength of all women, that regardless of, regardless of what we're going through, we could actually, still have a voice, still react in positive ways. That's something that inspired me throughout last year. Is going to continue for the next year. And just to ensure that the voice of women are not silenced, even after 43 years.
Thank you so much. Now, are there stories archived in video format, book format? How can people know this story if they're not here today?
If you Google or search Our Story is One campaign or Our Story is One, you
Say
will
it slowly. Our Story is One?
Our Story is One. If you search that hashtag, there's also a website, ourstorysone.com, and you see stories and you see videos and you see a lot of artistic representation of the lives of these women. And there's also going to be a documentary coming out soon.
Ourstorysone.com. Awesome. Way new. Also, you've been doing a lot of exciting things around peace, but you also have indicated and shown the spotlight on the lack of resources for women leaders. Can you talk more about that?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. The Women's Peace Network, my organizations, have been working mostly in Burma, in Bangladesh and Thai-Burma border, and collaborating with women across the world on protections of human rights and religious and ethnic minorities and women's rights. And we actually work on the ground, providing emergency assistance and protections to documenting cases of human rights violations and sexual and gender-based violence, and reporting them and advocating within and outside of the country, including at the U.S. Congress and with the U.S. government, promoting religious liberty across the world, me being part of the Atrocity Prevention Network. And so it's been from the ground to the bottom, from the ground to the higher up, to the international level in DC, from New York at the Security Council to everywhere. We just actually released a report today, this morning. I was just finalizing this early morning, the report title, The Renewed Atrocities Against the Rohingya in Rakhine State in Myanmar. You can find online if you look at our website, womenspeacenetwork.org. So please, just to introduction, throughout our work, we have actually engaged with so many women organizations and women's leaders in Burma, across Southeast Asia, and around the globe, including in sub-Sahara countries. And we've noticed a lot of these women's organizations and women's leaders are practically working with very, very limited resources. There are not a lot of obviously, there's not a lot of women leaders as well as women's groups working on the religious liberty work. At the same time, in general, women's organizations or women's leaders are very underfunded. One of the projects that we run as a women's group, although it's not a women project, it was mitigating hate speech online, and it's called My Friend Campaign, where we brought young people from different communities together and have workshops and engagement at the same time, promote social media, the campaign, taking selfie within, among the different friends, among the different communities. And it's called My Friend Campaign, and it's been named as awarded by the United Nations, and I've been named as a champion of preventions. And this campaign has been used in many universities and institutions as an example of tackling hate speech, because it's beyond the communities, beyond the countries, and it's universal. But we've run that campaign with $20,000. While haters, while the perpetrators of these hate crimes, hate speeches, are using millions of dollars to promote hate speech, we had very limited resources to use to do this kind of work. One, it is important that there is enough resources to tackle the issues of religious violations, including hate speech. Two, it is important that women's organizations are funded funded adequately in a way that they can enhance their work and they can promote women leaderships on the table or women representation to the table. And we're not seeing it today.
Awesome. If you looked at the picture of NATO officers and leaders who were meeting today, actually, you saw a sea of men and one woman in a white dress. And that's kind of how the religious freedom world has been running in terms of the optics. The domination has been by male leaders. So I'm going to give a shout out to our friends at Templeton and other places who fund. Even just funding the 6 women that are up on this panel would be awesome for us to document what we're doing. So all of those who are funding sources, we need resources, and we hope that you might hear these fabulous stories and actually help some of these women. I'm going to ask each of you to give your website before we get into our next question, slowly, so people can take it down and you can hear from them and be in touch with them even beyond this Notre Dame meeting. And again, we do thank Dean Cole and Stephanie and all those who made it possible for us to be here today. But if you give your website, please, it would be very important. Many of us are mothers, and we're in the midst of juggling many balls. Wei Wei told you she had to go back and feed her child in between. And I am going to be leaving as soon as we're done. I'm in the midst of a family reunion. We had 92 of our family on Friday night. I left to come here, and there are 52 waiting for me. So I'm going to make a mad dash. If you want to ask me something, I'll give you my website. You can get me at womenontheworldstage@gmail.com is my email, or thewowfactor.live is my website. Thewowfactor.live, because we try to wow you. Okay, Katrina, can you tell us your website, please?
Oh, sure. It's pretty simple. Just lantosfoundation.org, www.lantosfoundation.org. And we would love to have you visit our website. That's so sweet of you.
Thank you.
Ambassador.
Hurunnessa, where's the best place to reach you?
Oh, well, through there. There's a, contact us
Okay.
link there. So,
And
absolutely.
Hurunnessa? Yes.
So Multi-Faith Neighbors Network's website is the letters mfnn.org. My personal website is getting ramped up right now, but you can email me at hurunnessa@mfnn.org.
And spell Hurunnessa for them.
Oh, God, okay. Hurunnessa. It is in the program, so it's my first name, my last name at mfnn.org.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Dent. How can they reach you?
Yes, if you go to bjconline.org/center, you can learn more about the work of the center, and through there you can learn more about the Fellows Program.
Okay, give it to us one more time.
Sure, bjconline.org.
Thank you. And Tschika?
You could reach me at
Talking to
bahai.us, bahai.us, or bic.org, or Our Story is One campaign.
Okay, Wei Wei?
So it's womenspeacenetwork.org, www.womenspeacenetwork.org. Women have S there.
Has an S on it.
And you can also reach out to me at Wei at womenspeacenetwork.org, or info@womenspeacenetwork.org.
So you've heard just a snippet of some things that we've been doing solo. And what I'd like you to do is talk about some collaborative effort because many of us met on panels, did work together coming up through my position. So Katrina, tell us some of the collaborative work that you've done with some of the women that are here.
Well, probably the two that I've worked most closely with that are on this panel are Wei Wei, who was a main stage speaker at, I believe, the very first Earth Summit that we did. And her story was so impactful. And I just want to say, you know, you're looking at some real heroines up here who are so brave and have been, as Rachel Miner, I don't know if she's in the room now, but bellwethers, real leaders. They have been at that cutting edge. Ambassador Sujay and I really became friends and collaborators during the time when she was serving as our ambassador at large for religious freedom. And at that time, I was the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. So our relationship and our connection goes back a long way. I want to say about the Baha'i that I have such admiration for that community, not only for the remarkable spirit of sort of universal respect and fellowship that they embody, but as you said, for the way in which gender equality has been a defining characteristic of that faith community. Gender equality and incredible courage, and I am so looking forward to seeing the material on the Our Story is One, because there are so many amazing and heroic and very humbling stories about Baha'i women. And of
Absolutely.
course, when I think of the women of Afghanistan, they are so brave. They are so remarkable, so beautiful, so strong. Several years ago, the Lantos Foundation, which I head, every year we give our highest honor, the Lantos Prize, to human rights heroes. And a few years ago, we had the great privilege of honoring 3 Afghan women. Khalida Popal, who was the captain of the first Afghan women's soccer team, national soccer team. And oh gosh, now my memory's going to fail me, but
We'll come back to that, though.
yeah, we'll go back to that
Okay.
later. But I just fell in love with the women of Afghanistan, and they are now again suffering under this brutal Taliban regime. Believe people when they tell you the bad things they're going to do. Please believe people when they tell you the bad things they are going to do, because they mean it. And we see that now with, once again, the shutdown of education, of work opportunities, of the freedom simply to come and go for not only Afghan women, but Afghan girls. So they are among my great heroes in the human rights work I do.
And Hurunnessa, you are doing some exciting things. I know of one podcast, but tell us how you're collaborating with some of the women on this stage.
So yeah, I've done a few things with almost everybody here on the panel. I'll start out with my podcast, which started right before COVID, and just looking for content, hearing from women's voices on religious freedom and multi-faith collaboration and relationship building, and I really couldn't find anything. So I started my own, and I recruited Rabbi Sue Shankman, and then I went to Dr. Sabrina Dent, and I said, hey, girl, I have this idea. Do you want to come and be a co-host on my podcast? Because it's me, it's Rabbi Sue, and you, and I think you were happy about it. And so we started this podcast. It's called Sister Act, and you could find it on any platform. And it's just us women talking about life issues, different topics. But the most important thing is to have content from perspectives of women who are in whose faith kind of centers their beliefs in or their spirituality and what that looks like, and to show people that you can be friends, you can have a relationship with someone that you might not agree with everything with, right? Sue and I don't agree on a lot of things, and we make it very clear. And I'm
That's
like-
my friend campaign.
yeah. and I will tell him, like, I don't agree with you, Rabbi Sue, but I still love you, right? And I'll still go out to dinner with you and we'll have fun. So it's important to keep those examples out there and show people that you can build relationship and how it's done. With you, Ambassador Sue and Wei Wei, and thank you for Katrina for honoring us to speak at the Earth Summit this year. That was amazing. And I was on the Youth Serve panel with Tschika this year as well. Again, promoting women's voices and learning from them is important because there's a lot that goes on the ground that we don't learn about. We hear the academic side, we hear the law side, but we don't hear people actually, their voices in terms of what they're doing on the ground and what that can actually bring into your organizations as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sabrina Dent, I know we're all interlocutors in the real way, but tell us something you're doing collaboratively.
Yes, so in addition to being on the podcast with my wonderful sister here, we love it. We have a lot of fun. I'm grateful for the opportunities that we've had in partnering together, Ambassador Sujay. In 2018, I had the honor and the privilege of leading the African Americans and Religious Freedom Project that was funded by the Henry Luce Foundation. And it was the first time that a project was funded and in collaboration with all 6 historically Black theological institutions, and to have the conversations about religious freedom in this country and the experiences of African Americans. And so it was a joy to have Ambassador Sujay, who was also at one point a fellow with the Religious Freedom Center where I worked. But it was a privilege for me because as a Black woman in America, to see another Black woman in this religious freedom world, which was very white male dominated. It was just powerful to see that experience, and so I'm grateful for that. And that's actually how I met
Diplomat in
Tschika.
residence.
Yes.
I was diplomat in residence.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I loved it too.
Yes, and then that's how I met Tschika McBean. And so we have partnered a number of times with the U.S. Bahá'í's Office of Public Affairs on various issues, because again, we have to look at this as a comprehensive issue in terms of many different religious identities and nuns and the experiences that people have through the lens of human dignity, right? If there's no human dignity, there is a problem. And as what you talked about, if we're talking about religious freedom, not really doing something about it that relates to the human experience, that's a problem. So yes, there are many ways in which we've collaborated and will continue to do so as well.
Exactly. And that's why we need funding from them. Thank you so much. Tschika.
Yes, I recall that in 2018 I started with the U.S. By Office, and one of my first public engagement was actually speaking on I guess the course that you were heading, and that's where I met Ambassador Sujay, and I was so inspired by the work that you do, and I met Sabrina Dent, and I'm just, these powerful, dynamic women, oh my God, I was so happy to be in this space and just to learn from you all, and just to, when I encounter like a struggle in my work, or just even in all the things that I do, I just think about all the strength of you all on this panel. I think about, wow, they have endured this and they're continuing to do this. And so let me use that strength to continue the work that I do. And for Professor Swett, like, we always attend the Religious Freedom Summit every year. And just the depth of the panels and discussion, and just if you follow her work, you'll be inspired. You're just follow her work and you'll be inspired as well. And also for Hurunnessa, we sat in a panel together, and to hear about the work that she's doing in regards to the menstrual cup, and there's a children's choir that she heads, and it's just a beautiful, just beautiful stories and inspiration. And one of the things about their Stories One campaign is to see the thread of persecution and strength, but just the fact that when we come together collaboratively, we can solve so many problems, because we do need that strength and that connection to uphold us in this particular line of work that we do. We see so many tragedies, and it's good to see positive work as well.
And Ernesta, that choir, that choir, the Bahá'ís and Muslim children singing together, is it the first of its kind in U.S.?
Yeah, so this was the first time. We've sang there once before, but it was the same center. And so we were invited. I'm the music director of the only masjid youth choir in the whole country, because it's not part of what we do as Muslims. But Imam Majid was adamant, because I have a music background, to start this Muslim youth choir. It's called the Adams Beat. And we were invited to the Bahá'í Center, and we went. It's close to where we are in Sterling, Virginia. And we went, and we just were there about 6 weeks ago. And I worked with the Bahá'í kids and the Muslim kids to sing We Are the World together on stage at the Bahá'í Center. And we might look at that like, oh, it's so cute, little bunch of kids singing on stage, and it warms our heart. But the impact of that for those children is far greater than we can imagine. These kids were never exposed to Baha'i kids before in that setting, maybe in school, but not in a collaborative session, not in a way of learning about how their center works. I take my kids and we get invited to a lot of different faith places as well, like churches and synagogues as well.
Awesome. That's powerful. That's a great model. And we met on the stage. Katrina had us last year at the Earth Summit. Yeah. Tell us some things you're collaborating with the other women on the stage.
Thank you very much. I think one of the most beautiful thing or impactful thing for the RF Summit itself is learning and inspiring among each other, from each other, and learning from each other, and finding ways to collaborate each other, and also seeing women collaborate each other. And actually, it's actually also kind of women supporting each other, empowering each other, and which is the most beautiful thing I find. While women are often sidelined, when women are not even supporting each other, and that is a cruel thing. So when you see that spirit, and that is the most beautiful thing for me. And I'm also very grateful to the Ambassador Swett for her leaderships on RF Summit and creating space for all religion and across the world, and including myself. And it's been the most I think effective way to collaborate among each other. And I was not only some of you in this panel, but also beyond this panel, I was able to collaborate and engage with the Yazidi women, for example, and Christians, women, and Jewish communities, including like Christians who are in the U.S. From Burma, but I am not connected to. But the IRF Summit brought us together so that we were able to collaborate and enhance our work. So I think it's beyond this panel to another panel to the, to wider communities. So overall, I would say bringing people together like this summit and IRF Summit is the first step. Second, how do we effectively and meaningfully engage over time as we build relationship, connections, and trust among each other. And thank you, Ambassador Sujay. You actually met me for the first time in the last panel, and then you invited me for this panel. So that was, wonderful.
Yeah, so you owe me. I love it. So yeah, we're good. That's what we're trying to make happen. So we've all shared wonderful stories: political prisoners, refugees, daughter of the first Holocaust survivor elected to Congress, daughter of a Pentecostal minister who couldn't always have his voice. We've shared our backgrounds. In 1 minute, if you had a pitch in terms of why it's important going forward to make sure women's voices are heard in the religious freedom conversation, if you had 1 minute to do it, what would you say, Katrina?
Okay, I'm going to talk even faster than usual. Brian Grimm is sitting here in the audience, and many of us are familiar with his research that shows that societies that do a good job, a robust job of protecting freedom of religion, conscience, and belief have a lot of positive outcomes. Higher levels of economic success in those societies, lower levels of violence and instability, but very significantly, higher socioeconomic status for the women in those societies. This fundamental right impacts the lives of women in profound ways. Women are very often the prime victims of religious persecution, either because they are part of a marginalized and targeted group, such as what Weiwei experienced, and they are sort of the first and the most egregious victims of that kind of targeting, but also sometimes from the misinterpretation within their own faiths of religious principles that cause them to be repressed, restrained, persecuted within their faith communities. And yet we see again and again their courage, their leadership against all odds, not because the mantle of leadership is graciously placed around their shoulders, not because the torch is graciously passed to them, but they find a way in spite of all the obstacles to lead. I think of the women of Iran.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll stop
Hurunnessa,
there.
thank you.
So one of the many beautiful things that I love about my faith as a Muslim who's practicing Islam is the religious freedom advocacy that Islam promotes. A lot of people don't know that, and it's been there over 1,400 years. But because Muslim countries have been battling colonialism and their own survival for a long time, it has been put in the back burner, and I'm trying to be a part of the movement to bring that back. And advocacy doesn't mean you only advocate for people who pray like you, who look like you, and only see God like you. Advocacy is important for you to advocate for those who don't do things the way you do. And that's when you know that your advocacy work is actually meaningful, because you are advocating for, let's say, religious minorities in Muslim majority countries. That's a passion of mine. But let's think for ourselves, who are we advocating for? Is it just people who look like you, or are we advocating for those who might not have a voice? And as a woman, I'm pushed to do that from my faith perspective. And women, like I said even before, are great at building relationships, are great at bringing people together. And without us, a lot of the movement and the stability and the process and the long-term viability of relationships and projects are going to die. So
you.
women really need to be part of that.
Thank you, Dr. Dent.
Yes, at the top of this conversation, I said that religious freedom is a justice issue, and I meant that. We have to look at religious freedom through an intersectional lens, and if we're looking at it through an intersectional lens, we have to look at the experiences of women and exactly what Katrina talked about, the impact on society and the things that are happening to women. And I'm going to name this in this space, that we have to pay attention to the ways in which Christian nationalism impacts women in this country in many different ways. I talked about how it is important to think about, when we're talking about religious freedom, who has power, who has agency, and who has the right to be human. When you're human, you have the right to make decisions about yourselves, about your bodies, about your families, about your lives. And I think right now in this stage where we see Christian nationalism playing out a lot in the public square, especially in public schools, which is concerning because that impacts educators, and the majority of educators are what? Women. When we think about what is happening in our families and decisions that are being made around our families and beliefs, we have to take a critical look at the impact of that. Even what's happening right now in terms of education around book bans, voter suppression bills that are coming up, these have detrimental impact on the ways in which women can make decisions and move throughout society. So we have to talk about it, and I'm committed to doing this work and for us to understand it more deeply. And if you want to know more, I would encourage you even to look at the group of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, because there are Christians that are addressing this issue and not sitting silently on the sidelines.
Thank you so much, Tschika.
I would say when women advocate, they typically advocate for the entire community. And when they're targeted, it's felt by the entire community.
Yes.
So we need to always support and engage women, especially in the religious freedom space. And I want to read a quote real quick about what the Baha'i faith say about the importance of women. And it says that women will be the greatest factor in establishing universal peace and international arbitration. Assuredly, women will abolish warfare among mankind. It didn't say Baha'i women, it says women. So we need women to be in these spaces so that, according to the principles and so that peace and grace and these qualities will be upheld in spaces like this.
Thank you. And Wei.
That was beautiful. I would say we name this as religious freedom, freedom of belief and conscious, or so and so. At the end of the day, we are protecting human. At the end of the day, we are protecting human rights. At the end of the day, we are protecting human dignity. At the end of the day, we're protecting human liberty. Because of these violations of human liberty, human freedom, we are suffering uniquely. Both gender, male and female, are suffering uniquely. Although often women's voices are sidelined as a women issue. So therefore, when we address these issues, as we're not able to comprehensively address, understand, address, or take actions, because we risk undermining these comprehensive understanding of the religious freedom work. So I think when women are part of it, and when women issues is a part of it, and we are able to address comprehensively, take actions effectively, and promote human liberty.
So, won't you join me in thanking this tremendous panel? Katrina, Lantos, Swett, Hurunnessa, Fariad, Dr. Sabrina, Dent, Tschika, McBean, and you have a last name.
Okosi.
Okosi, and Wei New. Let me thank you for the work you do, for joining us on this panel, the work that's before you to do, but just enlightening us today. Just tremendous work, and I count it an honor to be your sister worker and warrior in this field. So thank you very much for joining us. Today, Mia is going to come and give us an announcement just before lunch, and we thank you for joining us in this wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you all.